Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. Silva. Thank you for joining me. What if I told you the key to your mental health might not be entirely in your brain, but also in your gut? Turns out the gut and the brain are in constant conversation. It sounds wild, but science is uncovering an extraordinary connection between the bacteria in your intestines and the thoughts in your head. Today, we're diving into how your gut microbiome could be shaping your mood, thoughts, and overall mental health. Today is World Microbiome Day. Happy World Microbiome Day, everybody. World Microbiome Day is celebrated every year on June 27th. It's an international awareness day that highlights the importance of microbiomes, the diverse communities of microorganisms including bacteria, fungi, viruses, and protozoa, and their essential roles in human health, their impact on other animals, plants, oceans, and the planet as a whole. There are more bacterial cells in our bodies than our own cell count, which is in the tens of trillions. We're basically walking ecosystems. World Microbiome Day reminds us that invisible ecosystems affect everything from personal immunity and health to agriculture and global sustainability. And this includes our mood and likely our behavior, including and especially eating behavior. More on that in a minute. The day was founded in 2018 by APC Microbiome Ireland, a leading research institute in Cork. Since then, it's gained support from scientists, educators, healthcare professionals, and organizations all around the world, all dedicated to raising awareness of how microbiomes influence human health, agriculture, ecosystems, and our beloved blue planet. In addition to promoting research and scientific collaboration across disciplines and countries, the day hopes to encourage sustainable practices that protect microbial diversity. This year's theme, Microbiome 101, What You Need to Know, is a perfect theme for today's video, which I've intended to make sure that my viewers, most of whom are probably aware of the term, have all the basic knowledge they should. Most of you have probably heard of our microbiome and how important it is, but you may not realize just how important it is in terms of your mental health. This year's theme is about making microbiome science accessible and meaningful to all audiences, the focus being on understanding what a microbiome is and why it matters. So today, I'm going to explore the concept of beneficial microbes versus dysbiosis. Hopefully when I'm done, I'll have encouraged and inspired you to adopt a more microbial-friendly diet and practices. What is a microbiome? A microbiome is the collection of all of the microorganisms in a particular environment, whether it's your gut, the surface of your skin, the mouth, a soil sample, or the vast ocean. Your body is home to trillions of microbes, tiny bacteria, viruses, fungi, and other microorganisms that live mostly in your gut. Far from being just gut bugs, they play a huge role in digestion, immunity, inflammation, and as it turns out, your mental health. Think of them like a bustling city inside your body, and they're constantly texting the brain. Your mental health might not just be a brain problem, it could be a gut problem. We've known for a long time that in our bodies, these microbes play crucial roles in digesting food and producing nutrients, regulating the immune system and our nervous system, and protecting against harmful pathogens by a phenomenon known as competitive inhibition, when beneficial microbes outcompete harmful pathogens for resources or space. The good microbes crowd out the bad ones and keep them from thriving. This is why it's not a good idea to take antibiotics indiscriminately when not absolutely necessary or for longer periods of time than necessary. Patients will often ask me to prescribe them a Z-Pak, a 5-day course of azithromycin, for symptoms which might be due to a virus, in which case antibiotics are ineffective, just because a doctor prescribed it to them in the past and they had a favorable response. Placebo effects then make them think that the medicine is effective, because if it is a virus, they'll get better over the course of about that length of time on their own anyway. Meanwhile, they've killed off millions of good bugs for no reason. And we've learned that chronic intermittent use of antibiotics can select out resistant bacteria that these medicines then have no power against, which explains the rise of MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, in hospitals. Vancomycin is traditionally the antibiotic of choice to treat MRSA, but of course now we have VRE, vancomycin-resistant enterococci, because pathogens are constantly mutating. Competitive inhibition is also the principle behind using probiotics to treat or ward off infectious conditions in the GI tract. A probiotic is a food or supplement that contains beneficial bacteria or yeasts, live cultures. A prebiotic, in contrast, is a non-digestible food ingredient, like fiber, that promotes the growth of beneficial bacteria. It doesn't contain live bacteria or spores, but our friendly gut buddies thrive on it. Fiber promotes the growth of beneficial bacteria that's already in our gut. So even though we can't digest it, in addition to promoting gastrointestinal motility and therefore being good for regularity, which decreases our chance of colon cancer, among other health benefits, fiber can ultimately have wide and far-ranging beneficial effects vis-a-vis our gut buddies. Postbiotics are soluble factors secreted by live bacteria or released after bacterial cells break open, providing physiological benefits to the host. So pro, pre, and post. I once had a terrible stomach ache that was unusual. It felt like somebody had punched me in the stomach, a sharp, deep, constant pain. And I was able to surmise that it was due to an invasive bacterial pathogen. I diagnosed myself. But it failed to respond to an entire bottle of Pepto-Bismol, bismuth subsalicylate, which has some mild antibacterial actions against H. pylori, which is the bacterium associated with peptic ulcer disease, and some strains of E. coli, responsible for most travelers' diarrhea. In fact, my condition worsened overnight. And rather than getting myself to urgent care and taking an antibiotic, which would have been the next step, I thought to take a probiotic, a supplement containing beneficial live bacteria to compete with the invading species. But I couldn't find any capsules that night. It turned out I had some buried in a medicine drawer, but it was late and I felt too ill to drive, so finally, after suffering for several hours, it occurred to me that I had a couple of yogurt smoothie drinks in the fridge, and within an hour of downing two, I felt an almost instant relief as the yogurt coated my stomach, but then 15-20 minutes later, sure enough, the invaders were stalled and overwhelmed enough for my own immune system to finish the job. That's my presumption. And so I was able to reverse the acute dysbiosis that was making me so sick by drinking yogurt. So microbiomes are very important. I should probably also mention that my use of powerful round-the-clock antacids at that time almost certainly contributed to the infection. I was taking both a proton pump inhibitor in the morning and an H2 blocker and an antihistamine at bedtime. And so the usual stomach acid that would have protected me against small doses of invasive bacteria was largely absent. And it's probably why I got this very unusual bacterial stomach infection, which is another point that I want to make in this video. It's not just antibiotics or a poor diet that can mess with our body's immunity by wiping out the good bacteria right along with bugs that we're trying to target. Over-the-counter medications like antacids can also upset the balance of our gut microbiome, especially the proton pump inhibitors like Prilosec, Nexium, Prevacid, and Protonix. It's always a risk-benefit analysis, but you should definitely discuss it with your primary care provider. Peptic ulcer disease may trump this consideration. I mean, you can get esophageal cancer from chronic, severe, untreated gastroesophageal reflux disease, GERD. Not to mention being in pain all the time, but those medications used to be prescription only, so definitely discuss it with your doctor. So, what does the mammalian gut microbiome affect? We're talking not only about bacteria, but also resident viruses. Did you guys know that we have a virome? Hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of viral particles in and on our bodies at any given time. The virome is part of the microbiome, and these particles play important roles in our overall health as well as fungi and archaea, which are single-celled organisms very similar to bacteria. That includes the extremophiles you may have heard about, organisms which live in extreme environments like deep-sea hydrothermal vents, salt lakes, acidic bogs, hot springs, etc. And the Methanogens, anaerobes that produce the methane in cow farts. Yeah, they thrive in anaerobic environments, oxygen-free environments like swamps and the digestive tracts of ruminant animals. So besides producing the methane and flatus, these microbes maintain the intestinal epithelium. They also metabolize dietary and pharmaceutical compounds. They resist pathogens, as I've mentioned, directly affecting the immune system as well in other ways, and even our behavior through the gut-brain axis that I'll talk about in just a moment. Maintaining the gut epithelium, the gut lining, is also a major way in which these beneficial bugs help to ward off pathogens by keeping them from entering the bloodstream directly, just like our skin keeps ambient bacteria from invading our bodies. The skin is actually part of the immune system. In fact, it's the largest immune system organ. It's also the largest organ, period, in terms of area. And without this barrier, we couldn't survive against bacteria in the environment, which is why severe burn victims often die. If they survive the fire, skin grafting is vital to prevent local infections from spreading and causing sepsis, which is widespread infection and inflammation that can be life-threatening. So the epithelial lining of the gut, along with a layer of mucus and immune cells, also keeps out the trillions of bacterial cells that enter our body through the mouth. Without these barriers, we'd be toast. The bulk of intestinal microbes are bacteria. And by the way, speaking of bulk, did you guys know that the bulk of fecal content we excrete is not undigested food fibers, but bacterial proliferation? Up to 60% of the dry mass of feces is bacteria. Most of it is bacteria, if in fact it is good stool. The best stools are large and bulky, and they move the bowels frequently. If not daily, every other day, ideally. And they're of a Goldilocks consistency, not overly dry nor slimy. Not too pale, but also not dark. And these ideal stools, these perfect stools, are achieved by eating the right diet, period. Meaning lots of fruits, nuts, and veggies, and plenty of fiber. You don't need meat. You can get all of your essential amino acids from plant protein, just FYI. I'm not preaching. I'm not a vegetarian myself, okay, so full disclosure. But I do strive to avoid flesh, anything that comes off a carcass. It's really kind of gross when you stop and think about it. Imagine walking up to a cow and taking a bite. But anyway, most of your poop is bacteria, and happy bacteria make large, well-formed stools that are easy to pass, but not watery. Not pale, but also not the color of coffee grounds. That usually means there's blood if it's really dark. So be careful about that. There are as many as 1,000 different bacterial species in the colon. 99% though are comprised by 30 to 40 species, including the famous Escherichia coli and various species of Bifido bacteria, as well as lactobacilli, so named for their ability to ferment lactose, the sugar found in milk, and streptococci. Interestingly, the vast majority of these species, more than 99%, are anaerobic organisms, meaning they can't survive in oxygenated environments, in case you were thinking that there's a lot of oxygen in your colon. Each gram of intestinal content contains up to 100 billion cells, mostly in the colon where there's very little oxygen. Relatively few species of bacteria are present in the stomach and small intestine. Benefits include protection from other pathogens, primarily by maintaining the epithelial barrier, but also by competitive inhibition, synthesizing vitamins B and K, metabolizing bile acids and other compounds, and fermenting dietary fiber into short-chain fatty acids, among other metabolic actions. Creating those short-chain fatty acids is important in nourishing the cells lining the colon, and it's one way that the bacteria help to maintain the epithelium. But you have to eat the fiber first. So nourishing our gut buddies with a proper, healthy diet is paramount. Prebiotics. These short-chain fatty acids also reduce systemic inflammation, and they stimulate the release of certain gut hormones that help regulate appetite, insulin sensitivity, and overall metabolism. So the intestines function somewhat like an endocrine organ, and this functionality is significantly affected by the gut flora itself. We know how much hormones affect eating behavior. The GLP-1 agonists that everyone's taking these days, like Ozempic and Wegovy and Mounjaro, have profound effects on our eating behavior, as well as other pleasure-seeking behavior. And they're currently being studied in alcoholism and other chemical addictions. So I think there's some very interesting information that's around the corner. For now, we know that hormones affect our brain, our appetite, and we have some very profound effects on our behavior, at least initially. Now let's talk about poop transplants. That's right, fecal transplant experiments. Experiments in mice have shown that transferring gut microbiota from one mouse to another can influence the recipient's weight, behavior, and susceptibility to certain diseases. gut bacteria from an obese mouse transplanted into a lean, germ-free mouse caused the latter to gain weight and vice versa. Furthermore, changes in behavior that were used to gauge mood and emotional states in rodents, kind of hard to do, we're inferring, but these experiments also showed an impact, and human experiments are underway. Fecal transplants in humans have been used for a long time to treat recurrent C. difficile infections, Clostridium difficile, which causes a very difficult to treat diarrhea. It's a famous nosocomial infection, an infection that we see in hospitals. We see epidemics in hospitals. So the staff is passing it from patient to patient, even though they're being very careful. Just patients being around other patients and using the same rooms that other patients used before them, no matter how much we try to wipe the areas clean. And so you see them in hospitals and they're hard to treat. They tend to be resistant to a lot of antibiotics. Fecal transplants have been used because some individuals have a sort of natural resistance against this pathogen because their gut microbiome is so healthy. It's somewhat of an opportunistic infection as well, in that you're treating patients with antibiotics, and so you're killing off good microorganisms as well as the pathogen, and C. difficile can be selected out because it's resistant to a lot of antibiotics. And so you're killing everything except C. difficile, and you select out that organism. Now the patient has a C. difficile infection. Researchers are now looking at how changing the gut microbiome might affect mood and behavior. I have to mention, though, that obviously it would be easier for the human host to simply adopt the dietary habits of the donor to cultivate those friendly gut buddies. Eating more fiber is a whole lot easier and certainly better for you than asking a vegan to donate their poop so we could treat your depression. I think I would rather just eat more broccoli. Dysregulation of the gut flora has also been correlated with a host of inflammatory and autoimmune conditions. The whole of this topic goes well beyond the scope of today's video, but just a few words on the gut-brain axis, the two-way biochemical signaling that takes place between the gastrointestinal tract, the GI tract, and the central nervous system, also referred to as the Microbiota-Gut-Brain axis because it's the bugs that matter. It includes the gut microbiota. And of course, the central nervous system and the GI tract communicate back and forth via the vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve. It's called the vagus superhighway. But those are electrical signals and neurotransmitters. Here we're talking about a different axis that includes the gut microbiota and the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord, as well as the neuroendocrine system, various glands, including the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the neuroimmune system, which is the connection between the nervous system and the immune system, the sympathetic and parasympathetic arms of the autonomic nervous system, including the parasympathetic vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve, and the enteric nervous system. The enteric nervous system is called the second brain because it's a complex network of neurons that communicates with but operates independently of the central nervous system, and which governs the function of the GI tract, controlling the movement of food through the gut, the release of digestive enzymes, and blood flow regulation. There's so many neurons that it's called the second brain because it doesn't quite have as many neurons as the central nervous system, but it really rivals the central nervous system. And it's certainly the highest density of neurons in the peripheral nervous system. The enteric nervous system is why the presence of food in the gut, pressing against and stretching the walls of the gut, activates peristalsis, the involuntary wave-like muscular contractions of smooth muscle that propels food and liquids through the intestines. It's obviously part of the autonomic nervous system. We don't have to think about contracting our intestines. In fact, we can't voluntarily contract the bowels themselves. But it's why bulky, indigestible dietary fiber helps to prevent and treat constipation by keeping things moving along, so that the colon doesn't absorb too much water from slow-moving feces, and we end up with hard, dry stools that can't be easily moved by peristalsis, and that end up clogging the tubes. There's an entire nervous system in our guts that contains more neurons, around 100 million, than any other part of the peripheral nervous system, and that uses neurotransmitters, including serotonin, dopamine, and acetylcholine. In fact, more than 90% of the body's serotonin lies in the gut, not the brain, as well as about half of the body's total dopamine stores. And while the total number of neurons in the enteric nervous system is still less than the brain and spinal cord, chemicals released in the gut by the microbiome can vastly influence the development of the brain starting from birth. The brain, which continues to develop in humans well into young adulthood. These chemicals affect the stress response, anxiety, and cognitive parameters like memory function. As alluded to, there are immunologic, endocrinologic, and neural connections between the gastrointestinal tract and the central nervous system. It's incredibly complex. Gut microorganisms influence the function of the brain by leading to the release of a host of chemicals, including not only neurotransmitters and neuropeptides, but cytokines and chemokines, humoral factors including the production of antibodies, endocrine messengers and microbial metabolites like the short-chain fatty acids, but also branched-chain amino acids and other esoteric molecules. It's all very esoteric, but the gut microbiota can produce a range of neuroactive molecules. The details are well beyond the scope of this video, but studies have confirmed communication between the gut and the hippocampus, which is important for memory and emotional regulation. The prefrontal cortex, crucial in decision-making, impulse control, social behavior, and higher cognitive functions, and the amygdala, responsible for processing and regulating emotions. The bottom line, gut health is directly linked to mental well-being and emotional resilience. Many disorders, such as anxiety, autism, depression, and schizophrenia, have been linked to the gut-brain axis. Not only neurodevelopmental conditions like autism, but also neurodegenerative disease states like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. The first time an interaction between the brain and the gut was demonstrated was when Ivan Pavlov, the famous Russian physiologist, won the Nobel Prize in 1904 by demonstrating the cephalic phase of digestion, characterized by the release of gastric and pancreatic secretions in response to sensory signals to the brain, such as the smell and sight of food. So not only did Pavlov's dogs salivate, but even more remote organs got ready to digest food as a result of signals from the CMS. What can you do to keep your gut buddies balanced and happy? Of course there are nuances, but simply put, avoid food that comes in a box or a bag, i.e. processed food, most of which we know is junk. Most of which is total junk, engineered to be addictive with added sugar and salt and fat, and which is the main reason for the current obesity epidemic. It's an established fact. Our metabolism hasn't changed in the few decades that have seen an explosion of metabolic syndrome, of obesity and type 2 diabetes and hyperlipidemia and hypertension and other related conditions. It takes a few more million years to evolve a new way of processing food, maybe tens or hundreds of millions, not a couple of decades. What's happened is the proliferation of fast food and packaged, processed junk food. Food that is engineered to be addictive, supplanting that junk with plant-based, fiber-rich foods, and especially greens like spinach and cruciferous veggies like broccoli and cauliflower, yum, but also beans and nuts and seeds and whole grains, and avoiding meat and avoiding dairy. That's the way to go. You know, it's something we haven't already heard, but this is in the context of your mental health, not just so that you can lose the weight you want to lose, be more trim and fit and have more lean body mass and do better at the gym, to feel better and to think in more healthy ways because your mood is better. Notice I say avoiding. Not everyone can be a vegan or even vegetarian. Millions of years of evolution have seen to that as well. We're omnivores. I myself, just in case you were wondering, am a flexitarian. That means that I will eat meat. I don't require a meat-free diet. I'm mostly a pescatarian. I love fish and seafood. If you eat red meat every day, gosh, you're in the high-risk group. Short-chain fatty acids can reduce the cortisol response in acute psychosocial stress situations. So we want to feed our gut buddies, the ones that love to eat fiber, the lactobacilli and the bifidobacterium. We really want those to proliferate so that we can get those short-chain fatty acids that also help with stress-induced changes in intestinal permeability. Studies are looking at the effects that these molecules have on depression as well. So in addition to leaky gut syndrome, they may also be implicated in major depression. While probiotics have a potential role in the treatment and prevention of anxiety and depression, it's better to rely on prebiotics. You have so many more health benefits if you just feed the good gut buddies. Another new term is what they're calling a psychobiotic. And that's a term that's being used in preliminary research to refer to live bacteria that, when ingested, might confer mental health benefits by affecting the microbiota of the host organism. So it's just a kind of probiotic. What can disrupt your microbiome? I already talked about antibiotic overuse and a poor diet. I'm going to define that as a diet that's low in fiber and high in sugar, primarily with a lot of red meat and a lot of processed meat. Also using artificial sweeteners, which are toxic to our gut buddies. They reduce levels of lactobacilli and Bifido bacteria and potentially disrupt the body's ability to regulate blood sugar levels. And they contribute to inflammation and a leaky gut. Here are the main dietetic problems that have reached pandemic proportions. Number one, a low fiber diet. Why is it harmful? Fiber is the primary fuel for our beneficial gut bacteria. They can't compete with the bad bacteria if you don't feed them. These good microbes starve and the harmful ones flourish. And we're back to the principle of competitive inhibition. Avoid diets that are high in refined grains. White bread, white rice, heavily processed snacks, fast food. You want whole grains, you want the brown rice, legumes, beans and peas, veggies, fruits, and seeds instead. Number two, high sugar intake. Excess sugar feeds the harmful bacteria, the evil bacteria. We just didn't evolve with the intention of having all this sugar, all this processed free sugar. We evolved to eat plants. All this sugar also feeds yeast like Candida albicans. And so you get increased gut inflammation and dysbiosis. Avoid soda. Soda is just sugar water. Candy, of course, pastries. Replace sugar with complex carbs. Quinoa, oats. This sounds so hoity-toity, but just get your natural sugars in moderation from fruit. Get the fructose that's in fruit, not high fructose, just regular fructose, the regular amount with tons of fiber and vitamins and all the other good stuff that are in whole fruit. Number three, frequent consumption of artificial sweeteners. As I've said, this is linked to glucose intolerance and altered gut flora, plus the bloating. Diet sodas, other zero-calorie drinks, anything that's quote-unquote sugar-free, including gum. You have to chew a lot of it, but also light yogurts and diet products in general. Number four, excessive alcohol consumption. This is almost a no-brainer. Alcohol is toxic to many beneficial microbes, and it irritates the GI lining directly, increasing gut permeability, and that could certainly contribute to leaky gut syndrome. No amount of alcohol is beneficial. That's a myth that's been debunked, and that includes red wine. Alcohol is bad for us. Here again, I'm being realistic. While being a teetotaler is the ideal condition, the key word for most of us is excessive. If you drink every day, that's too much. And it doesn't matter the quantity. And if you can't or are unwilling, you won't not drink every single day, if you can't cut down to a few times a week, once or twice a week, or just on the weekends, you may have a problem controlling alcohol if it's that important to you. And the more you drink, the more harm, right? It's a cumulative effect. So I'm just going to say, really look at yourself. If you drink every single day and it's important to you to drink every single day. Number five, also avoid red and processed meats, all right? Especially bacon, sausage, you don't even know what's in sausage, hot dogs, oh, I love hot dogs, movie hot dogs, all beef, Frank's, delicious. Terrible for you. Deli meats are also terrible for you. They're processed, they're salty, and they're potentially carcinogenic. Number six, another problem is the lack of fermented foods. So this is not a problem with what we eat, it's a problem with what we don't eat. Fermented foods are probiotic. They provide live beneficial bacteria. A diet without them misses an opportunity to enrich gut diversity. I'm talking yogurt, kimchi, kefir, sauerkraut, miso. Number seven, low polyphenol intake. Polyphenols are plant compounds that support beneficial anti-inflammatory bacteria, i.e. prebiotics. We're talking berries, green tea is rich in phenols, a lot of herbs and spices, olive oil. Number eight, finally, eating the same foods over and over. Very harmful to your microbiota. Microbial diversity depends upon dietary diversity. Well-rounded diets. Repetitive diets starve less dominant but important microbes. So the ideal is tough, though. We should aim for 30 or more different plant foods each week for diversity. How many of us non-vegetarians can say we achieve that? So to recap, how can you support your microbiome and your mind? Start with food. Eat more fiber from plants. It's what your good bacteria thrive on. Add fermented foods like yogurt. Cut back on processed sugar and artificial sweeteners. Cut back on alcohol, red meat, and especially processed meats. And beyond diet, prioritize quality sleep, regular exercise, and stress-reducing habits like mindfulness or nature walks. Those latter three contribute to longevity, and not just a longer lifespan, but a longer health span. Those things are good for you no matter what, but they are also good for your gut microbiota. So I urge you guys, please reflect on your own lifestyles and dietary habits today on World Microbiome Day. Please like this video or subscribe if you learned something today, and please stay tuned for more great content.